Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take sources you send us and, well, we pull out the most interesting bits, really important stuff.
Yeah, the idea is to get you quickly up to speed on something specific.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into something pretty fascinating and definitely specific that popped up in the materials, frigophobia.
hmm Frigophobia. So, based on these sources, it's not just, not liking winter.
Right.
It's described as a pathological fear, a really persistent fear of hypothermia.
Pathological meaning, like it's excessive.
Yeah, unwarranted. It hangs around even when there's no actual danger of getting too cold, even when the person sort of understands that intellectually.
Okay.
And you might see other names for it too. Cryophobia, chemophobia, chemophobia. Bit of a mouthful, those last ones.
Got it. And the thing that jumped out at me straight away, and I bet it will for you listening too, is that this phobia seems, well, mainly connected to Chinese culture.
That's the really striking part highlighted in the sources, yeah.
Okay, so let's dig into that cultural connection then. Where does that come from?
Well, it's interesting how the sources trace this. There's a study mentioned from Taiwan back in 1975,
Okay.
and it linked frigophobia in men to another condition called Koro.
Koro. What's that?
Koro itself is a culture-bound syndrome involving anxiety about genital retraction, but the key link here was the interpretation of coldness.
Ah, I see.
In that context, feeling cold was seen as a sign of having too much female element, yin, compared to the male element, yang, an imbalance.
Wow. Okay. That's that's a really powerful example of how cultural ideas about the body, about elements, can shape fear itself.
Definitely. It shows how deep these beliefs run.
And it's not just history, right? There was a more recent case.
Exactly. A 1998 case study looked at a 45-year-old Singaporean housewife with frigophobia.
Mm.
The researchers basically concluded her condition was really closely tied to and influenced by the cultural beliefs around her.
So it reinforces that idea culture isn't just background noise here, it's actively shaping the phobia.
Precisely. It influences the experience, how it develops.
Everything. And I think you mentioned China actually has a specific term for it.
Yes, that's right. It's called weihanjiang.
100.
Yeah. And it literally translates to something like coldness fearing syndrome.
Okay, coldness fearing syndrome. That's pretty direct.
It is. And the sources give us a window into how traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, understands this.
Right, and it comes back to that yin and yang idea you mentioned earlier.
It does, fundamentally.
Could you maybe elaborate on that a bit? For listeners who aren't as familiar with yin and yang.
Sure. So from the TCM perspective, Weihanshang is strongly believed to stem from a kind of disharmony, an imbalance between yin and yang.
Okay.
Think of yin as representing sort of the cooler, darker, more passive forces or aspects, and yang represents the warmer, brighter, more active ones.
Got it. Like opposing forces.
In a way, but more complementary. Health is seen as a balance. So with Weihanshang, the idea is there's maybe too much yin or not enough yang.
An excess of coldness, essentially.
Yeah. Or a deficiency in warmth, yeah. That's seen as making someone more vulnerable to feeling cold and developing this fear of it.
And the sources suggested certain groups are seen as more prone to this.
That's what's believed, yes, particularly working women in China.
Working women, why them specifically?
Well, the thinking is that factors like stress, big life changes like menopause or pregnancy, even things like anemia can trigger this imbalance.
Okay. So external pressures and internal bodily changes are thought to contribute.
That seems to be the belief, yeah.
And does this manifest physically beyond the fear itself?
Yes, according to these cultural views. In winter, women with Weihanshang might report feeling cold all the time, especially hands and feet,
Makes sense.
and also back pains, which are attributed to this underlying coldness condition.
Interesting. Okay, so shifting gears slightly. The sources also mention connections to other, maybe more widely recognized psychological conditions.
They did, yeah. It's not just seen in isolation through the cultural lens.
So besides the cultural interpretation, are there links to things like anxiety disorders?
What the sources explicitly state is a link between frigophobia and conditions like hypochondriasis.
Okay, excessive health worry.
Right. And also obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD.
OCD, how does that connect?
Well, OCD involves intrusive thoughts and often repetitive behaviors to reduce anxiety. Perhaps the fear of cold becomes an obsessive thought, and the avoidance behaviors become compulsive. It's a potential link mentioned.
That adds another layer, doesn't it? Suggests maybe the fear of cold taps into wider anxieties about health or control for some people.
It could, yeah. It suggests multiple factors might be at play.
So, given all this, how is frigophobia actually treated? Both, maybe the standard ways and the culturally specific ones.
Right. So the sources mention standard therapies, things like low doses of anxiolytics,
Mm.
anti-anxiety meds,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe antidepressants, plus psychological help like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
To challenge the fear.
Exactly. Help people develop coping strategies. But, and this is where it gets really interesting again, there are these very specific cultural coping mechanisms that people adopt.
Ah, yes. So, if someone within that cultural context learns they have Wei Sheng,
They often take actions based on those traditional beliefs about restoring balance.
like what?
Well, the sources say Asian women might actually withdraw from the workforce.
Really? Withdraw from work?
Yeah. Or make very deliberate efforts to avoid cold air, drafts, wind,
Okay. Avoidance makes sense for a phobia.
and also follow specific dietary rules. Things believed to counteract the coldness.
Right, the dietary stuff. I remember reading that. It wasn't just have a hot drink, was it?
No, much more specific. Traditional Chinese treatments for Wei Sheng include things like chicken soup, often seen as warming, nourishing,
Classic comfort food, too.
definitely. Also, a mix of turnip juice, ginger juice, and honey, apparently 3 times a day.
Ginger juice. Ginger seems important here.
Very. Also red tea, again with ginger juice, and sugar, maybe twice a day. Ginger's warming properties are really key in TCM.
What else? Any other foods?
Yeah, foods with yeast, like bread, using warming spices, chili peppers mentioned alongside ginger,
Okay.
and even drinking vinegar diluted in water.
Vinegar. That one's surprising.
It is a bit, but it fits into the TCM framework somehow.
And these food remedies, are they used alone?
Often not. The belief is that they work better, they're more effective when combined with acupuncture.
Ah, okay. A whole system approach.
Exactly. It's holistic. Diet, lifestyle, treatments like acupuncture working together.
Which really highlights something you touched on, the potential clash, or maybe just difference,
What?
between how the patient sees their illness and how a therapist from, say, a Western background might see it.
Absolutely. That's a really critical point the sources make.
How so?
Well, it stresses how vital it is for any therapist to acknowledge and respect the patient's cultural beliefs about what's wrong, even if it differs from a standard biomedical view.
Because otherwise, treatment might not work, or the patient won't engage.
Precisely. You need to find some common ground, a negotiable approach.
Yeah,
It really speaks to the need for cultural competence in healthcare.
definitely. And just before we wrap up, there was that little see also note in the source material, hinting at related things,
Oh yeah, just briefly, it mentioned fan death.
which is a belief primarily in Korea about sleeping in a room with an electric fan running.
Right, and also genital retraction syndrome, which we mentioned earlier in relation to Koro.
So other examples where culture heavily influences health anxieties or beliefs.
Exactly. We didn't dive into those today, but their mention just shows that frigophobia isn't unique in being shaped by cultural context. It's part of a broader pattern.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. This deep dive into frigophobia. It's shown it's way more than just not liking being cold.
Definitely not. It's deeply embedded, especially in Chinese culture, tied into these long-standing ideas about yin and yang balance.
And it comes with its own specific cultural understandings, treatments, coping mechanisms, the whole package.
Yeah, the dietary rules, acupuncture, avoiding wind. It's all part of that package.
And I think the big takeaway here, looking broader, is just how much our cultural background can really shape how we experience psychological issues.
Right, how we understand them, how we talk about them, how we try to deal with them. It's profound.
Which leaves us with a thought, maybe for you to ponder.
Hmm.
How do other cultures think about and respond to different fears, different anxieties?
What can we actually learn from looking at all these diverse ways of understanding mental well-being?
Yeah. Maybe this discussion about frigophobia makes you curious about other culture-bound syndromes or just that whole interplay between our minds and our cultures?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Well, thanks for joining us for this exploration on the deep dive.